Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, welcome back, everyone. This is the second session of Critical University, the Paris Commune past and present. It's the 150th anniversary of the Paris Commune. We've had our first session in the morning with Sandra and Paul talking about the events of the Paris Commune, what actually happened, and the politics of some of the people involved in it. The afternoon session is going to look at the sort of tradition of urban uprisings or the kind of commune model historically, and also what it means for revolutionary strategy today. So this session will be led by me, but I will be in discussion with Gilbert Achcar and Penelope Duggan. So just to introduce the two speakers, Penelope is a leading member of the Fourth International based in Paris. She has also written the introduction to the Paris Commune, an ode to emancipation, which is out now with Resistance Books, and Fred is posting up regular links to that in the chat where you can get a copy. Gilbert is a professor at SOAS, University of London. He is the author of many books and articles, but in particularly La Commune de Paris, 1871, in a book called Revolutions, which was out with Haymarket publishers a few years ago. So welcome both of you. Let me just unmute you. Gilbert is unmuted. Penelope, are you unmuted as well?
Mm-hmm.
You are, brilliant. Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining us today. I guess I wanted to kind of just start very quickly with I've been reading this book, Rebel Cities by David Harvey, which I think is quite a good book. It talks about sort of the nature of the urban uprisings in recent years and sort of commune models or sort of proto-commune models. And I thought I'd just introduce this session because he gives a very good, quick explanation where he sees urban-based class struggles as one of the main kind of political events over the last 150 years. So he talks about obviously Paris from 1789, the French Revolution, through 1830, 1848, the Commune of 1871. Later events included the Petrograd Soviet, 1905, the Shanghai Communes of 1927 and 1967, the Seattle General Strike of 1919, the role of Barcelona in the Spanish Civil War, the uprisings in Cordoba in 1969, the more general urban uprisings in the United States in the 60s, the urban-based movements of 68, Paris, Chicago, Mexico City, Bangkok, and many others in the so-called Prague Spring. And the rise of neighborhood associations in Madrid that fronted the anti-Franco movement in Spain around the same time. And in more recent times, we have witnessed echoes of those older struggles in the Seattle anti-globalization protests of 1999, followed by similar protests in Quebec City, Genoa, and many other cities as part of a widespread alternative globalization movement. Most recently, we have seen mass protests in Tahrir Square in Cairo, in Madison, Wisconsin, in the Plaza del Sol in Madrid, and Catalonia in Barcelona, and in Syntagma Square in Athens, as well as revolutionary movements and rebellions in Oaxaca in Mexico, Cochabamba in 2000, 2007, and El Alto, 2003 and 2005 in Bolivia. And when I read that, it just, makes you realize just how, frequent these kind of urban uprisings are. What's, Penelope, let's start with you. What's your sort of view today on the role of urban uprisings, if you want to use that phrase, in terms of a wider socialist strategy?
Well, I think that certainly when we look around the world today, and I'm also thinking in particular of the different struggles of the indigenous peoples of Latin America, for example, who are very strongly based in the notion of territory and where they live, it seems to me that it's an obvious method, in fact, to organize, to struggle, and indeed to take those steps in self-organization and determining what's necessary for life that are absolutely crucial to socialist strategy. because in a previous exchange, you mentioned, is it an alternative strategy to factory occupations and this sort of thing? I mean, what I would say in relation to that is it's completely complementary, because you can't, in fact, have a factory or a workplace occupation unless it is supported by, in fact, the mobilization of the community in which it's placed. We saw that very clearly, obviously, in the miners' strike in Britain in 1984-85. So that's one aspect of the fact that for people to get together on the basis of where they live, the shared conditions of where they live, and to organize. And of course, another element today, and we saw very clearly in movements, in all the movements, the Occupy movement, the Indignados in the Spanish state, in the Arab revolutions, although of course Gilbert could say a lot more than I could about it. It was very much young people, very often qualified, but who didn't have jobs. So they didn't even have that possibility of organizing from the point of view of being in a collective workplace. And obviously big industrial collective workplaces do still exist, and we do see movements starting from those sorts of places, in South Korea and in China. But for many of us today, it's not very likely that strong movements bringing into play strong social forces are going to be able to start from that. And so I think that it is indeed inevitable that many of our experiences today will be on the like in the what in France we call the ZAD, the Zones of Alternative Development, or the indigenous territories in Latin America, and other forms of occupation are going to be a regular method of struggle, and one that shouldn't be undervalued because it's not taking place directly in a workplace.
Thank you, Penelope. That was very good. Thank you. Gilbert, do you have any sort of thoughts on this? Obviously, Penelope mentioned in particular the Arab Spring from around a decade ago. But I mean, what's your thoughts, on that, but also kind of like more globally?
Well, your original question was about urban uprising, right? And we live in a world that is obviously much more urbanized than the world was at the time of the Paris Commune. So it's obviously the most crucial form of revolution is the urban uprising. That doesn't mean that you don't have forms of struggle in the countryside, but the basis and where the center of power is in any country today is in urban settings. So, it's almost, I would say, anachronistic to discuss this, because this question is no longer on the table. It has been decided by the evolution of capitalism and urbanization. And of course, we see tendencies to self-organization, to self-management in uprisings at various levels. Just for instance, to mention the book that the title of which you quoted, Revolutions, which came out not many years ago, but last year at Haymarket. I'm a contributor to that book. It's a collective book, which was edited by Michael Lowy. And it's a book of photographs and text. It's a very nice idea of gift, actually, a more intelligence kind of gift than many. And I wrote 3 chapters there, one on the Paris Commune, one on 1905 in Russia, so the first Soviet experience, and one on the Spanish Civil War. And I could see, if you want, the trace of the commune in the three, in the two major historical experiences that followed the commune, which was the first chapter I wrote. Yes, we find this all over. I mean, when you have people organizing and replacing the state, and then you get into something higher level, because one thing is to organize in a square like Tahrir Square, which became the model for Occupy and all that. Well, they organized some type of management of the occupation, right? And you have to, when you have so many people in a square, you have to organize a number of services. You have a lot of services to organize. You will find the same happened in Baghdad in the uprising there in 2019, so 2 years ago, and they had to do the same. So from Cairo to Baghdad, from 2011 to 2019, you've seen this, but where people are organizing services and all that, you see it in a more, I would say, more. Organized at a higher level experience in Sudan, where you have in the neighborhoods and all that. So it's not just one square, it's a generalized organization of what they call committees of resistance or resistance committees of young people, which are very horizontal, actually, networking at the level of the country, but organizing in each neighborhood a lot of services. Providing for services that used to be organized by organs of the state, which were corrupt organs of the state, and the young people of the resistance committees provided for these services in different manners. So you have all this, but there is, of course, a qualitative difference between cases like the Paris Commune, or to mention one that you mentioned, the Chiapas, for instance, and Chiapas at the beginning, and the other experiences I mentioned. And the crucial difference is precisely the state, because one thing is to organize services while appealing to the army to intervene, as was the case in Tahrir Square in Cairo, 2011. A lot of illusions about the army, and the other is to replace the state completely, and starting with the central organ of the state, which is armed forces in general. I mean, this is the what any state would boil down. If you reduce it to its simplest expression, it becomes what Engels called a body of armed men, and men is appropriate here because that's mostly men, as we know. So that's when you have this being pushed aside, or which when you have a power vacuum created, and an uprising self-organizes to the point of organizing a counter state, alternative forms of state, that's where you get close to what the commune, the Paris Commune was, which was really, that's why it was called by Marx, the political form, finally found the political form of the emancipation of the proletariat, and also a workers' government. Yeah, that's a very different thing, but that's I think the key form of revolutionary struggle and of the overthrow of the bourgeois state.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, that's a crucial distinction between occupying a city square, which can be a very important political act, and often has acted in a very galvanizing way for many struggles, and as you said, Gilbert, obviously there's kind of organizing committees and so on within these encampments and sort of occupied spaces, but that isn't the same, or it's a very, very embryonic version, but certainly qualitatively is not the same as seizing control of a city. And then obviously, and as happened in Paris, if you seize control of a city, it's not just about running a camp. You've got to, manage the city. I mean, you've got to sort of, make sure things function. And so there's a political logic there to creating an alternative power structure, which isn't quite just the same as like occupying, like a town square or something like that. So I guess that's the interesting thing if we think about the question of these urban uprisings, where which have occupied towns or city centres, in Greece or Spain and in places like that. I mean, even in Seattle, very recently there was the occupation of Capitol Hill and kind of an autonomous zone. Would you say though that sometimes the more autonomist politics, which can drive some of these spaces, it's not the same as if you're talking about Barcelona in the 30s or sort of Paris in the 1870s? Gilbert, do you want to start with that, and then I'll take Penelope?
I'm not sure I understood what you mean. I mean, what is exactly the question you raised?
So some of the occupations are more driven by autonomist ideas of sort of reclaiming spaces, which isn't necessarily the same as building like an alternative power structure, if you know what I mean. So like I was wondering if we could explore that contradiction a bit more.
Sure, but but this points to another crucial difference between the Paris Commune, for instance, and some of the cases that you mentioned. The Paris Commune has even been blamed for being too democratic. And it was indeed very radically democratic. I mean, the Paris Commune, the first thing they did was to call for elections so that, they had a real democratic legitimacy for what they created. And that's very different from, whatever grassroots movements organizing as autonomy or whatever at the level of a neighborhood. That's not the same. So here again, we have a difference. And that's why the Paris Commune is regarded as a model, for Marx, the model of what he would call the dictatorship of the proletariat, and not the other examples that you mentioned. So I think here again, this is a very crucial thing. This the democracy, and this is when we speak of self-rule. It's not self-management by some people. It's self-rule by a whole collectivity. That's the big difference.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Penelope, do you want to add to that?
Yes, I mean, obviously, what Gilbert underlines in the difference between when you're actually organizing an entire community, when you are indeed taking over and replacing the functions that were or were not, in fact, carried out by the state is a very crucial difference. And of course, when we take the question in terms of urban and rural, and we shouldn't forget also the massive movement of the farmers in India that has been going on now for months and months. But whichever level of those movements that you're talking about, because they have to deal with the concrete practicalities, in fact, of daily life, whether it's, in the commune, there was the question that Paul underlined of the free rationing, the free food, and so on. But at every level of these, of course, daily life has to be organized. And this is where it's also extremely important to understand that the role that women play in organizing those aspects of life is absolutely crucial, and is not something that can be pushed to one side, because without the implication of women and obviously women are best placed often to say how those things should be organized, then things are going to work. And that just does give me the opportunity to give one of my favorite quotes from Trotsky, which is that, you know, if we're to change the world, we have to learn to see it through the eyes of women, which he precisely made in that sort of context of how do you reorganize daily life. And of course, that leads on to the discussion that we already started in the first session about the importance of the role of women in the Paris Commune, as well as in fact all these other movements, and the fact that we are increasingly seeing women, whether it's in Sudan, whether it's in Algeria, but in all forms of democratic movements today, coming more and more to the fore, and including raising the demands related to their position as women. But maybe that's going off on a tangent from how the point you want us to discuss right now.
Well, it's obviously a very important.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean it's a tangent in the sense it's not important, but maybe you had other questions that you wanted.
Yeah. Well, I've seen that Liam's put their hand up, so I'll take Liam. If people want to ask a question or a comment, feel free to do so. Don't forget that this is live streamed on YouTube, so if you don't want your face to appear, then please turn your camera off. And you can obviously change your name if you don't want your name to appear. If you want to write a question in the chat for me to read out, then obviously feel free to do so. You know, people can have like 3 or so minutes, like if they want to make a contribution or ask a question. So, Liam, do you want to start?
Yeah. So, this concept of taking control of geographical areas, either in the countryside or in urban areas, it's a very, very high stakes game. Paul said that the French state killed 30,000 people in a week. Earlier this week, the British state confessed to killing a number of people in Ballymurphy, in Belfast. And there were a couple of examples of what you would call partially liberated cities in the north of Ireland in the 70s, which did some of the stuff that Penny and Gilbert have been talking about, providing services, withdrawn from the state, and so on, and even organized, pretty sophisticated armed self-defense, and were able to keep out the state forces. Now, the reaction of the state wasn't, the British state wasn't as brutal as it was in France, partly because the press at the time was subjecting the British state to a much higher level of scrutiny, and it wasn't the seizure of the imperial capital. But I think one of the lessons I take from that experience is, if it becomes a purely defensive struggle, then within a matter of weeks or a matter of months, it's easy enough for the state to crush it, either through some sort of effectively siege, or much more often through just simple physical force, armed brutality. So I think the perspective has to be that when you've liberated a part of a city, when you've removed it from the power of the existing state, there has to be a perspective of expanding that to other parts of the country and actively working towards a disintegration of the state's forces as well. Otherwise, you pay with blood.
Thank you, Liam. That's great. So that's the point about like how to spread it. I'll take Lee, who also has their hand up. Then we'll go back to the speakers. Someone else puts their hand up. Lee.
Hey, thanks. So going on from what Liam's just said, I think it might have been Perry Anderson wrote a depressing article in New Left Review years ago, that all capitalist states now have out-of-town militaries that they can bring in and shoot their citizens quite happily because they're not from that particular area. And so part of what I'm looking at in my work is a positive vision. And isn't there a sense that there's a lack of a real post-capitalist state, i.e. what's the economy going to work like, what's the kind of, we're going to have a police force, are we not? There's no agreement on this, and this just bolsters capitalist realism, like there's no alternative, and that's why people are stuck in this kind of neoliberal hall of mirrors, because we don't have a positive vision post-capitalist. And there's an interesting piece by Nancy Fraser. She talks of maybe, and the work of Kim Stanley Robinson offers a bit of this kind of post-capitalist future in today's book. But her argument is we could get a kind of counter hegemony by unifying the environmental, the feminist, and the racialized others people in a kind of equal counter hegemony force without prioritizing any of those particular struggles, because they're all combined in the kind of long-term capitalist and environmental crisis. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Thank you, Lee. Yep, that's good. Terry's got a hand up, so in the rule of three, I'll take Terry as well.
Thanks, and thanks, Simon, and thanks to Penny and Gilbert for their contributions, which I thought, along with those of Paul and Sandra this morning, were absolutely fascinating. I think that this whole question of the way that, I think it was Sandra who emphasized it in her summary, but I think lots of people have made the point, the way that people change can change very quickly is hugely politically important when we're discussing strategy in this context, notwithstanding what Liam says about the price, which I agree with. And so the tension between the role of those of us who are already committed to this process and are bringing on board the lessons from all the historical examples that we're discussing today and many more, and those people coming in newly into struggle is quite complicated. I think the point Simon was trying to make earlier in his earlier question about autonomism is that the leaders of some of those movements kind of blocked of the 80s and 90s and even 2000s, blocked that process by basically saying political organizations go away, this is, we're learning everything anew, and very much kind of rejected all of that, and that's obviously very negative. But I think on the other hand, so is a notion that we don't continue to learn from people's living struggles, which every time there's a new experiment, create a slightly new relationship of forces, a slightly new set of questions, and a slightly new dynamic of energy, I think. So I'm not pessimistic, because every time I see people in movement, it inspires me. And I think it's important for revolutionaries to hang on to that living reality of the movement.
Thank you, Terry. That's great. Yeah. So yeah, there was kind of two questions there, I think. So one of them both of them kind of focusing on the question of strategy. So you have often areas of whole countries that get taken over by radical forces. You've got kind of, Chiapas in Mexico, for instance, the Naxalites in India controlling swathes of the countryside, the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka used to control, a large part of the country. So these spaces often kind of run completely independently and indeed in armed conflict with the existing state. But often these spaces have trouble kind of getting into the cities, or kind of, you know, being able to generalize their kind of movement, and then they do end up kind of besieged and so on. So I think both questions there were focusing on, I guess, which is the $64,000 question, in the context of some of these uprisings and movements, what kind of politics is needed to transform them or help, you know, develop them qualitatively to another level, where it's, you know, like a question of power more generally, not just in particular areas. Penelope, do you want to kind of start with that one?
Well, as you say, it's a $64,000 question. And if we had the answers, we maybe wouldn't be where we are now. Because obviously a perspective that is simply to stay at the level of having liberated an area, whether it's a town or an area of the countryside or what have you, or of course, actually, as we know, even if it's a whole country, is doomed to failure, because you won't exist forever within the capitalist society as an alternative. Because eventually capitalist society, one way or another, will want to get rid of you because you might give other people ideas, to put it sort of very simplistically. So, I mean, that's why for any movement that is in that sort of situation, whether it's the Zapatistas, or whether at the time in the north of Ireland, or if it's, for example, our own comrades of the Fourth International in Mindanao in the Philippines, one of the crucial questions is to build solidarity. And solidarity that isn't just a question of giving money or what have you, even though that might be very important, but is a real solidarity based on understanding the real situation and what is really at play. So, you know, the most of links possible, travel to and fro in non-pandemic periods, and we'll have to see what we think about traveling to those sorts of places afterwards, with, you know, the questions of air travel and so on, but using all the new technology to learn and so on, so that, I mean, obviously, therefore, that's a solidarity to use in a situation where they would be attacked, but also to develop those ideas, to propagandize around those sorts of ideas, and hope that they would, you know, have an impact, and get other people in movement. Because, for example, if you take the example of the women's movement, the latest wave of the women's movement since the mid 2010s. I mean, it is also because of the fact that you could see it, you know, through things shared on Facebook and, you know, and all the rest of it, the immense movements that were developing, for example, in Argentina, you know, it became something that spread and that was taken up. And so we had the unusual situation, I mean, at least it was the first time so far, that a new wave of the women's movement didn't erupt in the sort of Western advanced capitalist countries, but from Latin America. So that question of solidarity, of building links, and of building on the ideas so that other people go into struggle is what is crucial, and is what, for somebody like me, who has been you know, a political activist in an international for getting on for 50 years, you know, that's why I do it, because that is so important. But for example, the Paris Commune, the only way, what they tried to do to make links with the provinces was travel by balloon, because they couldn't get out of that ring of steel of the Prussians and the Versailles who were surrounding Paris. So that was obviously, you know, and I mean, people did go back and forth because, you know, there was a question of food and so on, but, you know, traveling to the provinces. So that is an absolutely crucial aspect. And it is one of the things that I find, sadly, is less present today than it was, you know, for example, when I was, you know, a student and in the in the 1970s of, internationalist solidarity. I mean, Palestine right now, of course, and it's absolutely wonderful to see so many actions, and my comrades being charged by the police here in Paris. But it's not as present, and it's not as ongoing as I think it was some decades ago. And I think that is a real weakening, actually, in terms of politicization for the new generations.
Thank you. Gilbert, your thoughts, so sort of,
Sure.
turning uprisings, whether urban or rural, into more kind of revolutionary struggles against the state and the kind of the capitalist class more generally. Any thoughts? I imagine you have quite a few.
Yes, as you say, having been myself into wars, so well, you have two patterns of revolutionary seizure of power that we have seen until now. One was through uprisings, right? And the other was liberation wars, or whatever kind of wars, but wars. Like, let's say, compare the Commune or even the Russian Revolution to the Chinese Revolution or the Cuban Revolution. You find the difference between these models. Of course, to expect the seizure of power through war to lead to any form of Paris Commune model would be, I think, a huge illusion, because the very I would say requirements of war, especially a war of movement, means centralization, means militarism, a certain degree of militarism, and therefore you can't expect any kind of democratic model to emerge out of that. But then, if you think of it, even those uprisings that we have seen have been historically related to wars. The Paris Commune is related to the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71. The Russian Revolution is, of course, related to the First World War, and so are the revolutionary experiences that Europe saw in the wake of that. And beyond that, what you have are the wars. So what you had are, special moments in which the army, the bourgeois army, has been paralyzed or defeated or whatever, and thus creating conditions for the kind of revolution, including because of war, armed forces that got mobilized to a large extent. And so you really get an army that becomes the workers and peasants in uniforms, right? And then it can itself become an epicenter, or one of the epicenters of revolution. And the Paris Commune is no exception because of the role of the National Guard. I mean, the National Guard was there for, as a suppletive of the army. And because of the war and all that, it had been very much developed. I mean, I think that the figures for France were, you had something like 600,000 people in the National Guard all over France. So that's a huge, especially for France of that time. It's not the same population as today. These are specific historical circumstances. But of course, if we were to wait for wars to have revolution, that would lead to a completely, I would say, deeply pessimistic perspective. And so what's the alternative to having wars? Well, the alternative to having wars, in order for revolutions to be able to win, is a deep democratic legitimacy of the revolution, And of course, that can only be completed with, of course, having not one half of society, but the whole society involved. I mean, Penny mentioned the issue of how decisive, I mean, that's, I would say, very obvious, the participation of women, or the role of women, is in any democratic legitimacy. And the ability, therefore, to prevent the use of armed forces in repression. That's not easy, but that's certainly easier in societies like the British one, or even, for that matter, I would say, even for the United States. If you have a general uprising of the population with a huge democratic legitimacy, the ability of capitalism to use the armed forces becomes much more limited, and even in that case, then you may organize defense. But the key point is to try to split there. In that case, the key issue is splitting the armed forces and winning over those workers and peasants in uniform, as they are called, to the cause of the revolution. So here again, we get to that is beyond. If we put aside the war revolution model that has been the one that we have seen historically until now, and that is one that we don't wish to become the rule, especially for the advanced capitalist countries, that would be a disaster, of course. Then the only alternative to that is the democratic legitimacy of the revolution. In that sense, I will point to a recent statement by Chomsky. And as you know, Chomsky is an anarchist. And he said in a very recent interview, I think it was with the New York Times, he describes himself as a conservative. And why is he describing himself as a conservative? Well, he meant by that he sees that the condition for change and social change should be winning over the vast majority, I mean, the majority, the clear majority of the people. And any attempts at forcing changes through minority rule are doomed to fail historically. And even if they succeed provisionally, they will lead to the contrary of the Paris Commune. They will lead to dictatorship, not of the proletariat, but dictatorship of the party or the leader or whatever it is. And that's, I think, the very important point.
Thank you, Gilbert. That's, excellent points. We've got some more hands have gone up. The conversation is flowing, which is great. So we are due to finish around 3:30, so we've got 45 minutes or so. So if comrades could bear that in mind when they're speaking. I've got Steve Freeman next, followed by Sandra.
Well, Simon, just the point I wanted to make was that the key lesson there was how to get from, and it's been raised actually, one of the speakers just read, how to get from city power, which is a communal republic in one city, if you want to call it that. How do you get that to, first of all, to national power? How do you get to become the new Republic of France? And then how do you get from France to the wider European, etc.? So that seems to me the key question. And obviously, there was a ring of steel, as I said, around Paris. You couldn't get out of Paris. But that seems to me is you have to have a national dimension to this. There are lots of city powers where the working class is based in the city, but how do you get to the countryside? And how do you get to other cities? And how do you make that revolution a national democratic revolution? And how do you create that Republican government in one country? And it seems to me that is the key thing that has to be thought about. And you can't just do that, as it were, it seems to me, spontaneously. You know, there has to be a party that is not just in Paris. So I think that was the key to me to the strategic lesson. And the Russians had the same thing. If it was just going to be a republic in Petrograd or Moscow, it had to get the Russian countryside on its side, as it were. It had to have the revolution in the countryside before the uprising in Moscow and Petrograd could take place in October. Okay.
Thank you, Steve. Very disciplined, brilliant. Sandra, you're up next.
Well, I wanted to reply a little bit to what Lee raised, because people haven't directly addressed what he asked about, well, felt that one of the problems is that there isn't a clear alternative vision of how society would be organised. And to be honest, well, I'm with Marx on this. Marx's attitude was, we are not about drawing up a utopia that then we are going to try to force on people, that actually the generations that make the revolution will make it in their own way, and they will have to find the way to organise new society. Now, a lot of people find that quite unsatisfactory, but I think if you have the confidence that the mass of people, like, it wouldn't matter how many mistakes they make, they couldn't possibly create a worse society than capitalism. And, you know, democratic decision-making and all the rest of it, there can be a whole range of ways that people begin to work out new ways of organising society, which doesn't involve a market, for instance. It organises on the basis of human need, which can easily be established today with the technology we've got. We can have international conferences. You can work out what are the resources, what do people need, what can be done environmentally safely, all kinds of questions that ordinary people can answer fairly easily, really, once they feel that their answers are going to be listened to, which people don't today. So I think that, I don't think it's a lack of vision. I think Marxists have a very clear vision of mass democracy and the working class actually taking control. And I really agree with what Gilbert said, that that's a different concept from self-management, which tends to fragment people, and it emphasises individualism or small groups of people. So I think the problem has been, from beginning to end, what everyone is grappling with, really, it's strategies of, you know, how do you get from one stage of radicalisation or lack of it into a situation of radicalisation? At one level, we have to admit, it's not all up to us, because the left today, especially, through a whole series of mistakes that have been made and errors, and the battle against Stalinism for decades that drove people into despair, that we can't. How do you spread a revolution? You can spread it if the depth of radicalisation is deep enough that people begin to follow suit. And they did try in the regions of France, which I didn't have time to talk about before, and I don't really know enough about it. But, you know, the Russians, the Bolsheviks, were absolutely clear that they could not build socialism in Russia if the revolution didn't spread. And there was a limit to what they could do. You know that is your theoretical goal, that you have to spread the revolution. Then it's a question of intervention, political argument, and how deep, you know, how well people manage their own uprisings. And one by one, sadly, were defeated and crushed because, you know, it was one of the first attempts at international revolution through Europe that Gilbert referred to. And, you know, there can be lessons learned from all of those, but that left Russia isolated. And it wasn't, you know, there's a limit to what you can do, but you have to have that vision that it's not enough to have some physical geographical space that we're in charge of, and we can somehow or other create a new world, because you will be crushed by the capitalist world eventually. That you have to have the attitude of, you know, we try to intervene in the movements that follow suit. We have to try to inspire people, show that we actually do have a new vision of the world which is being created in our space, and appealing to them to actually make the most of their opportunities. And, you know, at some point, I seriously believe that people will find a way through, because the sad reality is, I think, what Engels said, and Luxemburg's more known for, saying that if that process doesn't get carried out, we're facing an increasingly barbaric world. And I think that is what is going to drive people to revolution, not just our small groups and our propaganda. We're preparing for those times so that we can play a positive role in helping people work out. And I think they're the questions today not all the detail of how society would be run. And to be honest, that's not what people fight for. People fight because they're driven to it against the horrors of the system. And then in their struggle, they start to think about that, and everyone will be involved in that discussion, not just us.
Thank you, Sandra.
Could I just briefly respond to that, Simon? Would that be okay? Just briefly.
Okay, yeah, briefly, yeah, that's fine.
So I accept, yeah, so Marx, what he said is echoed by Foucault, that you can't say what it looks like, but the basic principles, because what happened with the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, is there was no basic principles, and this led to the kind of horrors that followed. So you can have a kind of broad brush, say the economy. How are you going to work? How are you going to organize work? Work will be organized in a shared job complex, like Michael Albert argues, where we don't have people doing fixed roles that are hierarchical. So just like broadly giving basic principles would help, I think. That's what I'm not saying like a detailed plan. So thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably Sandra agrees with that as well. I mean, so like, I mean, obviously there is there's the lessons of history, and so sort of one of the things socialists need to do is not be sectarian to new movements because they don't have the right slogans at the beginning. Like that's the importance of being involved and building solidarity. But there are lessons of history, and unfortunately, lots of new movements emerge. And like people don't know about the previous defeats. So I guess that's the balance. In terms of the principles and like also being involved in new movements as they emerge. There's a great conversation going on in the chat as well with some good questions as well, just to kind of draw people's attention to that. Rowan, you're next, followed by Dan.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. Oh, sorry, can you hear me? My volume seems that's probably better.
The volume's okay. Yeah.
Excellent. I just wanted to raise the subject of dual power in this broader conversation and potential difficulties with that model today. I mean, the model of the Soviets was raised in the chat as sort of an alternative or supplementary model to some of the stuff that's been talked about. And I've heard it argued recently by somebody that one of the problems that dual power has today, and Sandra raised the issue of technology in a positive way, but I think this is sort of more a impediment to it, is that with society being requiring hyper-specialized skills in all kinds of areas, the model of dual power today depends upon a diffusion of skills within the sort of proto-revolutionary movement that's really hard to do. Like for in Russia, in the context of Russia, in the context of the Paris Commune, you could offer healthcare to people in a way that a current socialist movement or a sort of proto-revolutionary movement couldn't offer, because that would require hyper-specific skills that you would have to have access to a very particular set of people, etc. And I'm wondering if there's sort of any reflection on those impediments, because of course after the revolution, the technology would definitely be a huge, tremendous help in terms of organizing society in all kinds of radical ways. But overthrowing existing society in its current technological coordinates could prove a particular challenge in terms of fulfilling all of the roles that the state fulfills now, and accessing the right people to do that.
Thanks, Rowan. Yeah, Dan, you're next.
Cheers, Simon. That was a interesting point actually about the balloons being sent out from the Paris Commune. I didn't know that. But yeah, continuing the discussion about like how we spread kind of uprisings and revolutionary ideas. I mean, one example, and I'm going to absolutely get the name wrong, but was in the Soviet Union, was Novocherkassk. I've probably pronounced it entirely wrong, but there was but obviously that was an uprising under the Stalinist regime, which wasn't able to spread, and it was an absolutely brutal massacre. But in terms of how we get that international solidarity, I think a lot more thought on the left needs to be put into how we actually start building those international networks now. Because one of the obviously huge revolutionary movements over the past decade was the Arab Spring. And actually the international left response to some of it, especially Syria, was appalling. Like, there was an utterly sectarian attitude to like the Free Syrian Army and, civil society that was being built up under areas that came out of like the Assad dictatorship's control. And a lot of people, because, that they, including, to be honest, even people like Corbyn and McDonnell, just kind of made crass statements about, these terrorist groups and without actually, and people just putting their hands in the air and saying it's all too complicated, what can we say? Rather than thinking at the heart of what went on in Syria was a massive uprising, for democratic freedom. And actually a lot of the demands at the beginning from the Free Syrian Army were very progressive. They were for, a secular state, for democratic elections. And solidarity work was done. I mean, my union branch raised a few £1,000s in a fundraiser to send medical equipment out to, civilian areas. But it was few and far between, actually, that kind of thing that happened. And I think that something that was really good that got when I got involved in my 20s was in the early 2000s in terms of international solidarity, was the European Social Forums and World Social Forums. And, they really inspired me. They led to the kind of global anti-war movement being really well coordinated. And I would have loved to have seen Corbyn talk about, like building something similar, across Europe and across the world. And I think, with all the things going on at the moment, and, people talking about obviously dreadful things that are going on with the Palestinians at the moment, I just wondered, is that something similar to the European and World Social Forums? Like, could they be built up again? Because I think if you had something like that was kind of almost permanently there, it would make it a lot easier to have solidarity. Because if you haven't got any networks in place and you're building from, zero each time that something kicks off around the world and you want to give support, it's quite difficult. Whereas if there's some kind of united front, like left networks of that nature on an international basis, it could work. How you make that happen, like obviously answers on a postcard, but if it was possible in the early 2000s, I can't see why something like that wouldn't be possible now.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, that's good. Neil, you are up next.
Don't seem to be able to make my camera work. Yes, I can, I think. There we go. Yeah, look, I wanted to sort of lay a ghost to rest on the basis of the discussion, which I think has been excellent both this morning and this afternoon, and do that actually by endorsing what Sandra has just said in her last contribution, because I think the emphasis was absolutely in the right place, which is that it's not about the revolutionaries, if you like, creating a blueprint for the new society, though we should talk about it. We should inspire people with the vision of an alternative. It's not actually about a revolutionary party spreading the revolution, because the revolution gets spread by the mass activity of the movement itself. I mean, if it doesn't, then it's going to fail. It's all about, it's the Hegelian idea that first is the deed. The Russian Revolution fails not because there isn't a blueprint, not because there isn't a very powerful revolutionary movement. It doesn't succeed in breaking through, and it goes down to defeat. It's destroyed by its isolation and then by Stalinist counter-revolution, and the whole thing is smashed. It's the movement itself that has the potential to trigger world revolution. I mean, I think, all the emphasis needs to be on the potential, creative, transformative power of mass movements from below in motion, because you get these tremendous explosions, not just of democracy, but explosions of ideas. As people become powerful, they gain in confidence, they gain strength from the power of the collective, and all kinds of ideas bubble up about how the world can be remodeled. It's not a matter of creating blueprints. And that's the ghost I want to lay, really, is the ghost of the Revolutionary Party. It's sort of been the ghost in the background for most of the day. And I think it's just worth underlining that what the Commune shows you is that the kind of Stalinist caricature that then actually becomes a post-war Trotskyist caricature of the Revolutionary Party is false. You don't actually need to build a revolutionary party, and that revolutionary party leads the revolution in a mechanical kind of way. That is an idea which is dead, really, and you only have to look at the Commune to realize that it's not actually what happens. What actually happens in the Commune is you get a spontaneous insurrection to take control of the city. You get the creation by the masses themselves of all kinds of different forms of mass democracy. And then, as the speakers have been saying, what that does is unleash this extraordinary creative potential and creative imagination, even in the space of just 2 months inside a single city. And a revolutionary party of sorts begins to emerge by the coming together of pre-existing forces, which Paul explained to us this morning. So the Revolutionary Party, in a sense, emerges in the course of the revolutionary process itself. But the key point, this is my last point really about this, the key point I would say is this: the more of the building blocks of revolutionary organization that you have in place, not a revolutionary party that in a mechanical way is going to lead the revolution, but the more you have in place groups of organized revolutionaries who can then come together in the context of a revolutionary upheaval and begin to create the levels of coordination that you need across the movement, and in order to spread the movement and in order to internationalize the struggle, the stronger those nuclei, if you like, the stronger those existing organizations of revolution that you've got as you go into a revolutionary crisis, the better. Which is why it's just making this very concrete point that there's a danger that we have an abstract academic discussion about the nature of popular struggle today on the basis of the experience of the Commune. We also, all of us, have to be involved in actually creating real revolutionary organization, not with the grandiose claims about being the revolutionary party, but with the intention of being part of a process whereby we begin to build, we begin to generalize that revolutionary understanding and that revolutionary organization that we need when the struggles do explode. But it will be the creative power of the masses that drives the thing.
Thank you, Neil. I've got Sarah next.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the earlier question on Rojava, because it didn't really get much comeback on it. I mean, if you were going to compare it with the Commune, I mean, I think one big difference is that the Commune was crushed at the time, whereas although they lost the province of Afrin, which has been subject to massacres ever since, the overall situation wasn't a complete defeat, and they are still hanging on. I mean, you might just note, by the way, that there was a bit of a difference actually amongst the American ruling elite, and there was quite a bit of pushback against what Trump tried to do in league with Erdogan, which gave them a bit more room to maneuver. But I mean, the other thing where I would say it's perhaps similar is actually there was a mixture of spontaneity and organisation. There'd been a lot of organisation in northeast Syria for several years. And I mean, the third thing, I mean, it's probably not different from the people in the Commune, but I think both the political organisations and the Kurdish people and their allies are quite determined. They also have a quite wide diaspora, and of course they have links of some sort, and the ones to Iraq were particularly important during the siege of Kobani, for example. So they are still there and they are still fighting. And there are networks. I mean, if people want to look on the Kurdistan, Peace in Kurdistan website, you know, you can get in touch with them and ask for guidance. There are various networks. For example, there's a group that has some sort of base in Brighton that campaigns around British arms sales that end up in Turkey, bomb racks for drones, to be more precise. So there is plenty that's going on. And also the political organisations do try to make alliances with people outside. You know, I know they talk to the Zapatistas, they talk to most people basically, and they are interested in discussing their ideas. So you don't have to agree with all their ideas, but, you know, they do have quite a lot of interesting ones which are worth discussing. So they are out there if people want to look. One place amongst many, but I think there are some important things going on there. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll just take myself for a couple of points kind of stemming out of the discussion. I guess one of the things that's come up in the discussion / debate is kind of on the Revolutionary Party. And I do agree there's been a bit of a habit on the revolutionary left dating back very, very many years to sort of identify a particular political crisis or, you know, an upsurge or an uprising which gets defeated. And then when you're sort of picking over the analysis of why it was defeated, the tendency is to say, oh, well, there wasn't a revolutionary party. So I think like there's a bit of a habit sometimes to kind of imagine that the Revolutionary Party is this Deus ex machina, you know, hand of God that kind of comes, just like resolves the situation, sort of, you know, like if every country had a mass revolutionary party, then, you know, then that revolution would have been defeated. This general strike wouldn't have been defeated. This kind of urban uprising wouldn't have been defeated. But I mean, the Revolutionary Party is only a vehicle for a political program at the end of the day. You know, like the existence of a revolutionary party or organization, whatever you want to call it, solves nothing if the political basis of that network, that organization, that party is wrong. And indeed, there's been countless examples where there has been, you know, quite large revolutionary organizations which then kind of failed. You know, they didn't manage to raise the right slogans or intervene in the right way, and then, you know, the forces of bourgeois reaction and counter-revolution kind of came in and you know, and then the uprising was defeated. So I think sort of the discussion around what is you know, the politics that needs to be argued for in any situation is very important. Of course, this is where like a socialist program of struggle is so important, because so many uprisings, urban uprisings, or, you know, like attempts to take over land or space or something like this is often done along, you know, national grounds or ethnic grounds or religious grounds sometimes. And they can be relatively successful in as far as they go up to a point, but they can't generalize, or they find it very hard to be able to, you know, draw in the broader social political forces which exist in the rest of the country, or also like internationally, to be able to develop the struggle to a higher level, you know, like a struggle where you're actually potentially fighting for power. So, you know, I think that's really the discussion that has to be had. So, I mean, like when we talk about the Paris Commune, you know, the question that people raise is they say, why didn't the Paris Commune spread? Sort of, you know, like what was the politics involved in that situation? I mean, obviously, we know it was also partly because it was besieged, but would the siege have failed if there'd been an organization of revolutionaries across France who were able to help develop uprisings in similar towns and cities to come to the aid of Paris, for instance? Now, that's not something that can just be built in the moment of revolution itself. I mean, like I agree with Neil's point, in a revolution, suddenly lots more people become revolutionary. You know, there's the famous example of the Bolsheviks in Russia, where, I mean, like I think in Petrograd in early 1917, they only had, you know, a few hundred members, really. A lot of their members were in exile or in prison. Then by October, they had thousands upon thousands of members, because people joined en masse because that was the party, Bread, Peace and Land. They had the slogan which most encapsulated the demands and desires of the masses of people. And so that was the party, the organisation that people looked to solve the crisis that was going on in the country at the time. But that only happened because they had like a pre-existing network of people that were able to intervene and raise those slogans at the time that was necessary. So I guess that's the sort of like nuanced contradiction, as it were, which is not that sort of the Revolutionary Party in and of itself solves anything. It's the politics that socialists can raise, which helps to generalize the struggle, like away from just an urban seizure of the town centre or a rural uprising that takes over part of the country. As Liam said in the previous contributions, ultimately, if you try and vie for control, even of a particular geographical area, at some point the bourgeois state will come in and shut you down. So obviously the Occupy camps got cleared out at some point, either like they withered away or baton-wielding police and water cannons were deployed to remove people. If it's more of a actual armed uprising, as it has happened in many countries, and obviously eventually at some point the army or the police or armed security forces will come in. So I guess again, I think it's the point that Trotsky made about the Russian Civil War. In any kind of conflict, like which comes to the point of force, it's 90% politics that resolves the conflict favorably. Like the actual fighting or the kind of military technical thing is 10% of the equation. The rest of it is a political consideration. Can you build the broadest possible forces with the broadest possible social layers, break the bourgeois hegemony, or the bourgeois hegemony is being broken because of the contradictions, and that's when you get the ruptures and the uprisings. So I think it's a very useful discussion. Like it's very interesting to think about like these things in practice. I haven't seen anyone else put their hands up, which is why I was cheeky and I Sandra would like to come back. So let's take Sandra. Then we can speak to Penelope, and then Gilbert can close off the meeting, if that sounds okay with people. So Sandra, do you want to?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Like, it's a fascinating discussion because we don't often get to actually talk about all these strategic questions. But and I do think, like, I agreed with, I don't know who made the point, might have been Terry or Penny, that actually we learn from struggles, but sometimes we learn things that help us to reconfirm the ideas that we actually started with. Learning doesn't just mean changing your ideas all the time. I think there's an element of that today, that if you don't change your ideas, people say you didn't learn anything. And I think the Occupy movement, like, I think in some places it was more radical, but like here in Australia, the lesson out of it was that Penny raised solidarity in terms of international solidarity, and I agreed with the discussion about that. But like in the Occupy movement here, and I think it happened in other places, because someone referred to it before, I know it happened in Spain, that rather than going out and searching, demanding, where are the unions, where's the working class, where's this group, where's that? People have been campaigning about something. Are you coming to join us in the square? Bring your issues here. We'll educate everyone about all our different issues. We'll bring them together. Actually, by the people who put themselves up as, unelected leaders, actually, for all the talk of democracy, determined that there would be no solidarity because they wouldn't give other people solidarity. We had an incredible occupation in our city square in Melbourne, and they tried to ban political banners. They tried to ban the unions from being present. And like, how can a movement develop on the basis of that you couldn't have a democratic decision about anything? So the idea that consensus was democratic, two people actually could hold a crowd of 1,000. We would have 1,000 at a mass meeting. 2 people could hold it to hostage. And to the extent that they actually did try to start to learn that they varied it, that sometimes, 20 people had to oppose the proposal. But it still meant that the movement was paralysed. But I think the main thing wasn't just the organisational structures, which they agonised about and got other people agonising about. And we had arguments about it amongst our own members at the time. We were a tiny group, but we argued that the structures didn't matter. We'd try to work with them, but because the politics of not being prepared to argue to other people for solidarity and to go out and build solidarity. Like we used to try to organise marches away from the square as often as possible to take up all the different issues, because there were heaps of issues that people had been campaigning around in the city, and to go, you know, through the city, gathering support, leafleting, arguing for people to come to the square. Even that was not acceptable because you were going out to talk to people. But those people, they're so backward, they haven't come to the square, you know, they're not here, the enlightened few. And all of this is carried out under the rhetoric of, you know, democracy, the old left is so authoritarian and all the rest of it, all of which is a caricature based on Stalinism. And, but, you know, I think that the lesson out of that was that you can't go anywhere by this narrow-minded, you know, lack of, we're actually rejecting the whole concept of solidarity, and it ends up, it's a really elitist idea that the few enlightened people who manage to be involved at the very first are the only people who can actually take anything forward. And I think that's just so counterproductive, and it's been proven to be so, which can give us confidence that our argument that you're building solidarity, and you find that you can build solidarity if the situation is right, and we can't always make that situation. I think trying to understand that tension between what can you achieve, trying to be realistic about what you aim to achieve based on the levels of radicalisation or lack of it or whatever, and building, you know, whatever you can out of any particular point, but definitely not rejecting the politics of solidarity, mass movements and all the kinds of struggles. So that I thought Neil and Simon in particular at the last there have really brought to life in a better way than what I had managed to before when I was trying to make my points. So it's a great discussion. I won't get to speak again. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you so much for your input as well. I can see from the clock on your wall behind you that time is getting on where you are as well. So thank you for staying up for the discussion. Okay, Penelope, you're up next. Let me unmute you.
It's because I've also got the television on to see what's happening. Yes, obviously, we learn from experience. We develop revolutionary programs from experience. Sometimes it confirms what we already thought, as Sandra says. Sometimes we learn new things. And anybody who says, you know, the problem with the Paris Commune is that there wasn't a revolutionary party. Well, I mean, you know, it would have depended what its program was. Would a hypothetical revolutionary party have proposed marching on Versailles and, very importantly, seizing the reserves of the Bank of France? Because those were the key points that that would have had to be done to have given the commune some resources and so on. So no, there was neither a party in Paris nor a party, but there was the International Working Men's Association, and the currents within it, which Paul and and others have mentioned. So I mean, yeah, obviously it comes down to politics, and it comes down to learning from the real movements. As Neil, I think, said, movements are incredibly creative when people actually do get to take charge of their own lives. So, you find out what is really necessary. And I would say, I don't think that it's so obvious, the important role of women, that it doesn't need mentioning anymore, because if it was so obvious, then we wouldn't need a women's movement and so on. So I do continue to insist on on that and on the importance, to get back to the Commune, of the Women's Union in Paris, because it gave women a voice, it gave women a capacity to propose and to impose certain decisions. And, you know, to a certain extent, and this is the opinion of quite a number of the women historians in France who are working on it, you know, the question of the right to vote, for example, was not particularly raised by the women themselves, and in the short period of the Commune was far less important than the actual real practicalities of what they did manage to achieve with the organization of the Women's Union, which was the organized force, as well as the discussions in the women's clubs, which were very important, because there were non-mixed, there were women-only clubs as well as women participating in the mixed clubs. But to get back to the question, or to get back to the question of revolutionary organization and so on, I mean, the first thing that I think that we should reject is the idea that any single party can have all the truth and therefore have the revolutionary program. I mean, it was a concept, some currents still have it, but it's a long time since the Fourth International rejected that idea with the adoption of a resolution called Socialist Democracy and Dictatorship of the Proletariat back in the 1980s. Because obviously, if you say, as Sandra did, for example, that you learn what's necessary through real experience, as different parties and organizations are in different places, either geographically or in time or even in different sectors or what have you, they're going to learn different things. And so what we do think is the importance of revolutionary organization, of course, is to have a moment where within a common framework, which you actually try to use all those experiences to have an idea, because you have to have some idea of where you want to go in order to know what to fight for today. So I completely agree. Obviously, we're not about drawing up blueprints for utopias or anything. I mean, you know, even 50 years ago, people couldn't have imagined a lot of the demands that seem to us today obvious, coming from the ecological movement, from the LGBTIQ movement, from the women's movement, and even from, you know, from workers themselves. For example, there are different demands around, you know, teleworking and should you be able to work from home or not, which are contradictory anyway. So I mean, they all have to be discussed, but they couldn't even have been imagined. So obviously it's a learning process because the world changes. I don't think the basic principles, obviously, of, you know, the emancipation of the working people will be the work of the working people themselves, in a famous phrase, does change. But I mean, even Neil, who to some extent, you know, seemed to go, we wanted to lay the ghost of the Revolutionary Party, but recognized the importance of different revolutionary groups, because we are more effective, not only in action, but also in thinking, if we do it collectively rather than individually. And so what was, you know, so it was good that the Paris Commune, through the clubs, through all the movement, and so on, and through the Council of the Commune itself and the councils at the level of the arrondissement and so on, was able to, you know, to discuss and to come up with all these ideas and so on. But that did fail because they didn't deal with some of these crucial questions that were actually at the kernel of the question of being able to challenge and to extend, which would have been marching on Versailles, and also the question of the Bank of France. But I would just like to say in closing, because that for us here in France, and obviously particularly this year, the 150th anniversary, but it does remain a very important point of reference for the left and for movements like the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests, and so on. And so we are in the midst of all sorts of, despite the pandemic, of all sorts of activities, outdoor activities, but usually the other things have to be online and so on, because it won't be the same. In 1936, at the Popular Front, there were 600,000 people for the traditional annual commemoration of the Commune, which is on the last Saturday in May, so the nearest to the 28th, which was the day of the final defeat. But we do hope that this year we will also be thousands out in the streets of Paris to remember the Commune under the slogan 1871, 2021, the Commune is not dead.
Brilliant, thank you, Penelope. That was really good. Gilbert, you have the floor for closing remarks.
Yep. Should I stop at 30, which means in 3-4 minutes?
I mean, you can have at least 5, but just be aware that we are due to finish around 3:30.
Okay, so very quickly. I mean, I will discuss this idea of spreading. Actually, the Paris Commune was not the first commune. I mean, for instance, you had one in Lyon, which is the second largest city in France of that time, and very similar events at the beginning, except that those who dominated were not convinced of carrying on beyond elections, and they relinquished power. But we have seen very interesting events, actually, even in something, the Lyon Commune achieved something that the Paris Commune did not achieve, which is winning the hearts and minds of the soldiers, because the government there tried to use the army to quell the uprising, and the soldiers refused, and the military commander had to change his plans. But the problem is that those who were dominant there were not the most radical, as would happen later because of different circumstances in Paris, but the more moderate, let's say, Republicans, right? So that shows you that the issue was not a matter of lack of party or whatever. I mean, these ideas, Henri Lefebvre wrote a fantastic, for me, it's the best book on the Commune, which unfortunately has not been reprinted. It's a 1965 book and not translated to my knowledge. But he makes fun, of course, of all these, what was missing. If they had this or that, or I don't know what, they would have won. I mean, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense to these counterfactual kind of history. The point is that you had organized people, and well, I agree with what Neil and Simon have said on the issue of the party, but that was very much also the conception. The international, the first international, was not just the Marxist. On the contrary, I mean, in France there were overwhelmingly Proudhonist, and they would see themselves as part of the movement in the line of what you find in the manifesto of the Communist Party, that is, the communists are one segment of the workers' movement. They are not the workers' movement. They don't claim to be the single representation, as you will have later on with different theories of the party in the 20th century. That was not what you had with Marx and Engels. And the issue is not, again, also this idea that, how would we spread to other cities? Well, that's an idea where you have an uprising in just one city, but that is the Paris Commune model. You can't generalize this model. What we have seen most of the time are national insurrections. Even when they start locally, they spread nationally because they are around a common cause. And we have seen that recently with the Arab uprisings, as they have been called. So that's not the problem. And actually, of course, don't forget that we are no longer in the age of the balloon, but we are in the age of the internet. I mean, the internet has made organization, networking at national levels and international levels far easier than what it used to be in the 20th century. And we have to keep that in mind, let alone the 19th century. So all these issues have, have to be kept in mind, and also the scenarios, because one thing is to think of uprisings as rebellions against the existing government, but you can also have, well, Penny just mentioned 1936. Well, 1936, you have an electoral victory of workers' parties in France that is followed by a general strike of the working class and all that. You can imagine, scenarios of that kind, and that's why also, I was saying that in countries like Britain or the United States, countries with a tradition of parliamentary democracy, the things won't be like what we have seen until now, except that we haven't seen yet any kind of real revolutionary challenge, or maybe May '68 in France, but that's even that is a long time ago. So just to finish with that, yes, I think indeed even the dual power, Rowan mentioned of dual power, this is one kind of possible revolutionary scenario. And the less you have a democratic legitimacy and a democratic tradition in the country, the more you may be confronted with that. I'll just end with a final example. Take what is happening in Myanmar, right? There you have, a massive mass movement which has full democratic legitimacy, but in a country where, there have been very few years of democratic functioning and military functioning as a caste and able to until now at least, to repress the movement in terrible manner. So here you have, this kind of duality is disastrous. That's the worst case scenario that people are mentioning. And I think the comrade who mentioned Syria, which indeed is another example of that, where you have a mass uprising, big popular uprising, but the regime manages to keep the elite forces that it has forged in some way, and therefore launch a brutal, barbaric assault on the population. So, we will be confronted with such issues, especially in the global south. That's no doubt about it. But the key point to make, to avoid these kind of scenarios is to be able to build the political legitimacy and the counter hegemony. And in that regard, let me just finish with quoting Gramsci. But I think his views on that, on the war of position, war of movement, the counter hegemony, and all that, are profoundly relevant and I think remain profoundly relevant to revolution in our time, and especially in the global north.
Thank you, Gilbert. Brilliant. Give you a virtual round of applause there on the Zoom reactions. Thank you, everyone who attended today's meeting on the Paris Commune. Thank you, obviously, especially to our speakers, Paul, Sandra, Gilbert, and Penelope, and everyone also who contributed in the discussion. I thought that was really good. That was a very interesting session. Obviously, lots of things around revolutionary strategy and tactics and so on that are ongoing and indeed historical debates. So it was really interesting to hear people's views on that. So this meeting was hosted by Anti-Capitalist Resistance. We're a new organisation organising in England and Wales. You can check us out at anticapitalismresistance.org. If you like what you've heard today, or you'd like to find out more, maybe you think about joining ACR, you're more than welcome to. Just go on the website and send us your contact details, and someone will be in touch. I don't know if the next meeting that we've got, which is going to be on, hold on, let me just Thursday the 27th is going to, which we'll get publicity online about soon, is going to be on the question of policing. So looking at the, indeed we've been talking about policing and the rule of law and, you know, the question of force in this meeting. We're going to be having a meeting on Thursday the 27th of May, looking at the role of policing in light of Black Lives Matters. So looking at the questions of, you know, defunding the police, disbanding the police, and socialist alternatives to the kind of security state capitalist police force which we have at the moment. So if you registered for this meeting, we will send you out details about that one as well. And obviously just finished the meeting by saying solidarity with the Palestinians in their fight for their national liberation, and also obviously solidarity with the thousands upon thousands of people around the world that have taken action today against the barbaric violence of the Israeli state against the Palestinian people. So we'll close the meeting there. Thank you very much.